So my question is, do you feel more people to just give in to this idea that rock bottom is actually a beautiful place? Don't live in just enough discomfort that you could bear with the pain and you not actually act on it, but fall into the discomfort, fall into the fear, the doubt. And yes, you may fall rock bottom, but that is actually the place where it all starts. And then you find someone like yourself.
Yeah, that's a brilliant insight, Juan. Uh, um, I think for each individual, it's a little bit different. And
Mm,
what I mean by that is this: if you grew up in an environment where you feel safe and you feel recognized and you feel loved and cared for and valued, when you're taking a risk, it never feels like risk. But when you've been ignored, when you've been punished, when you've been humiliated, when you've experienced violence, a risk seems like, ooh, that's too much. I'd rather endure. Because your brain's job is to keep you safe, right?
yep.
Your heart's job is to take heartfelt action.
Mhm.
Okay. So if your brain was raised in an environment where you're on eggshells all the time, your fear, your orientation of fear is too great. Okay. And that limits your ability to take heartfelt action to your own benefit and to the benefit of others. And so you need to keep running this pattern that you're running, right? The pendulum needs to stay and swing all the way to the left and get stuck up here before you're willing to ask for help. Now, again, if you grew up in a household and in the environment, it was a safe environment, right? You were nurtured and held and kissed, and um, your parents were honest and sober with you, and they led by example, right? Yet they gave you enough room to make your own mistakes. And guess what? You see mistakes as the path to success. But when you grow up in a household and you're punished for making mistakes, you must see mistakes as the path to hell.
Mm.
And who would want to volunteer to put themselves in hell? So do everything you can to avoid making mistakes. Well, you become risk averse, right? And so the child who grows up to be the risk averse adult, all you need to do is sift through and filter through their childhood. And what you're going to find is they were raised in an environment where they were punished, humiliated, rejected consistently. And they grew up in an environment as well that had someone who was emotionally out of balance. And so they're going to do everything they can to be on either side of that. So they're either going to be an intense risk taker that takes way too much risk, or they're not going to take any at all. Because when you grow up in extremes, right, extreme level of stress and distortion and dysfunction, you're either going to go all left or you're going to go all right. The middle line is the place that's the most vulnerable for you. Okay. And the middle line for me, I can relate from my own story. That was the vulnerable place for me to be content and to be consistent and to be receptive. That was vulnerable. That was scary. Okay. To take risks, sure. Let's jump out of a plane, right? With this little thing on your back. Let's dive at the deepest depths. Let's go through fire movement exercises with live rounds. Let's, start rolling C4 into specific shapes, right? And let's let's grab these detonators, right? That to me, it didn't feel like a big deal because I was already, the pendulum for me had swung too far to the right. But for the person who's too scared to hit the bottom rung, their pendulum is swung too far to the left. And so again, you become risk averse or too risky.
Homeostasis and balance is a beautiful thing. That's what we're all
Homeostasis,
looking, right?
yeah. Yet it's the most intimidating place for a child that grows up in a dynamic that's very uncomfortable,
Mm.
right? And children, they all want the same thing. They want to explore their environment. Like if you're a parent and you're listening, give your children the space they need to explore their environment and let them hurt themselves, right?
Mm.
Let them, you know, fall 3 feet, right? Let them bump their knee. Let them learn about their environment.
It's interesting because when I was little, I ended up with stitches, twice when I was really young over my eyes. My parents thought I lost an eye once, tripped and fell into the corner of a glass table. And, but the thing was, my parents still didn't hover over me and they allowed me to make those
Uh,
mistakes. And I look at children today. I don't have, but personally, I have lots of friends with children, and they just, nothing, never been to the ER, never had even a scratch. They just hover over them and they
yeah,
yell at them when they move
yeah,
into the backyard,
yeah,
and they restrict where they go, and they're always do is that not the exact thing you're talking about,
yeah,
that further in life will
yeah,
make them to the
yeah,
left all the way?
yeah. It will make them extremely anxious,
Right.
right? They will become outwardly dishonest, maybe even inwardly dishonest.
Mm.
They will have an intense amount of frustration and agitation, irritation, and resentment boiling underneath. And they will be fearful to take risks that are relative to their potential. Like if you have someone, look, if you're as a parent, if you're lucky to have a kid that's born with a IQ that's 140, well, guess what? You want to give them an environment where they can really explore and get really curious, right? Let the environment teach them, right? When the parent is coherent, meaning if a parent's stress levels are at neutral, okay? Neutral is it's not at pleasure, but it's not in pain, right? If a parent's stress levels are at neutral, they're going to create a neutral environment for their child. But if the parent is in anxiety, is in a fear state, is in a self-righteous state, if they're in physical pain and discomfort, guess what they're going to do? They're attempting to be good parents, and to be good parents for them is to avoid pain at all costs.
Mhm.
You need mistakes in order to learn. Okay. That is the pathway to success. Failure is the greatest aspect of success. No failure, no success. Right? People have a natural talent and inclination on how to do things based on the type of intellect that they were born with. Some kids are born with high levels of emotional intelligence, right? Their analytical intelligence is kind of low. Other kids are born with amazing levels of instinctual intelligence. Other kids are born with a good sense of what's right and wrong. They have, it's easy for them to be ethical and moral. And every child has their way where their form of intelligence and genius. And a parent's job is to foster that and to give them the space to do so and to make the mistakes so they can learn. And when they start making mistakes and they learn and they get rewarded, which is what I teach parents, if you have a child who's here to learn through trial and error, you got to reward them when they make a mistake. And then you got to ask them a simple question. What did you learn from that experience? And leave them alone before they go to bed. Susie, what did you learn from that experience today? Think about it. And then maybe tomorrow morning or maybe 3 days later at the kitchen table for breakfast, she says, Hey, mom, I think this is what I learned. And you go, That's amazing. I learned that too. And now the child is willing to take more risks because they know at the end of the day, my parent's going to relate with me and I have an opportunity to fail. And I get rewarded for failure rather than punished. And if you can create an environment where your children are rewarded for making mistakes, and then you give them a process where they can internalize that experience by simply asking them this question, what did you learn from that mistake? You're going to have a child that thrives in the world, is willing to take risk and makes the world a better place because they're willing to take risks. If we in humanity choose to avoid mistakes, punishment, rejection, humiliation, violence, discomfort, pain, and death, we will stop evolving. And then we will have to rely on things like artificial intelligence in order to start to evolve as a race because we've become too restricted in our ability to take risk, to explore, to express, to open, to be receptive, to be vulnerable, to be honest at an emotional level, internally and externally.